While I always encourage people to buy the best tools they can afford, I understand that a lot of people are on a pretty tight budget and things like anvils are hard to come by. This little 66-pound single horn anvil from Vevor may be the ideal solution for a lot of people who have limited funds. Yes, today's video is sponsored by Vevor. They did send me the anvil for free to take a look at. So this is more of the style that most of us here in the US are used to instead of the two-horn style that so many other anvils are. Both are good anvils. The other anvil is a good anvil. I think this one has some advantages over it, and I'll talk about those before the end of the video. Now, if we look at the specs on this anvil, obviously the weight is 66 pounds, which is a little on the light side for a general purpose anvil, but is way better than the sledgehammer head anvil that we used to make a knife a few videos back. And it beats a lot of the railroad track anvils, although I think 100 pounds is probably a better place for long-term use. But if you're just getting started, I think this looks like it's going to be a good anvil. From the tip of the horn to the tail, it is 17.5 inches. The face itself is 10 3/8 inches. It is 3.5 inches wide, and it's 8 inches tall. This has both a hardy hole and a pritchel hole in the place where you would expect a hardy hole and a pritchel hole to be, unlike that other anvil we've looked at that had the pritchel hole in the horn. It wasn't really a pritchel hole, it was just a hole all the way through the horn that gave you a way to mount the anvil. This one does not have the holes in the feet the other one had, so it needs to be mounted with straps, staples, something like that. The hardy hole then is 3/4 of an inch, and the pritchel hole is about 5/8. Looks like it's a little under 5/8. So it's probably cast based on a metric measurement. Doesn't really matter, make tools to fit the anvil, and if you're just using the pritchel hole for punching, you're probably not punching that big a hole anyway, so it's gonna work out fine. It does look like they've ground the bottom of the anvil down so that it will sit nice and flat, and of course the top has been machined and the horn has been polished up. So there's very little work that needs to be done with this. But like almost every new anvil, the edges are way too crisp and sharp. You need to dress the edges of your anvil before you use it for a couple of reasons. The number one reason is those sharp places can create stress points in your work, and that can cause failure. So every time you're working over the edge, you're creating little sharp corners. Those oftentimes don't forge back out again, and that's a place where you're going to have stress risers in your work. Work can crack, especially if you're working with tool steels. That creates a problem. The other reason you need to dress your anvil is because this is where your anvil is going to fail. The sharp edges are not as strong. This is where you're going to chip the anvil. In fact, this one's already got a couple little chips in it just from manufacturing because those sharp edges aren't a good idea. And those little chips I see here are going to completely disappear when I dress the anvil. Same thing for the pritchel hole and the hardy hole. You don't want sharp edges on that, especially if you're making fabricated hardy tools. A little bit of radius on the edge of the hardy hole allows someplace for a weld bead to go. So it's a good idea to radius all of this stuff. How much you do that is up to you. At least knock the sharp edges off, and that's the first thing I'm going to do with this little anvil. Well, that probably only took 10 minutes of actual work, spent almost as much time finding just the right discs and the right little burrs for the die grinder. That little band file is the perfect tool for doing the hardy hole, although it is just barely small enough to fit. It's exact same size as what the hardy hole is. They do make those in 1/2-inch sizes. Maybe one of these days I'll invest in something like that. I think these days you can even get them cordless, so you don't have to have an air compressor to run one. Now, as far as the radiuses, I radius a little bit more closer to the horn, so I got a nice rounded area for doing offsets and things. Then it's not quite as much through this section. It's a little bit sharper here, although still nicely radius. There's no sharp edge at all. And I just barely knocked the corner off the tail. So if I need a fairly sharp corner, I can come in and work off the tail of the anvil and get that sharp corner. I also knock the edge down by the step. Now, as far as a step goes, Traditionally on a London pattern anvil, when they were wrought anvils, they were made out of wrought iron with a tool steel top. This is the section that was tool steel, and the step was still wrought iron. So a lot of people use that as a cutting table, a place to cut so you're not going to damage your chisel, really chews up your anvil, and I don't like doing that even to an old anvil if it is soft. I'd rather put a sacrificial mild steel plate on the top of the anvil while I'm cutting. Then I don't chew up the step on the anvil. But these little cast steel anvils, they're all cast out of tool steel and they're hardened completely through. So this step is hard. It's going to ruin your chisels if you're using that as a cutting plate. Instead, just think of this as a little V-swedge or a step to do some little upsets into, something like that. Comes in really handy, but I wouldn't use it as a cutting table. If you're looking on things like this, small hooks, reasonably sized knives, stuff in this size range, I think this little 66-pound single horn anvil from Vevor may be the best budget-friendly anvil I've run across yet. For one thing, the pritchel hole is an actual pritchel hole. It's in the right place. It will accept a hold fast, which allows you to hold your work better. It's ideal for punching holes through, and in every way is far better than that oversized, out-of-place pritchel hole on those little two-horn anvils. So if you're just starting out, you haven't bought an anvil yet, this one might be the right solution for you. Once again, I'd like to thank Vevor for supporting the videos I'm making here at Black Bear Forge by sponsoring this video and providing this anvil for us to take a look at.